Very many repressive societies in Southeast Asia, some extreme. You can think of Vietnam, where there's almost no political freedom, Myanmar, where there's this horrific civil war. In Cambodia, it seems there's a little bit of room for maneuver. Give us a sense of how constrained freedoms are now, particularly compared to what people would have experienced 20 years ago.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you to the FCCT for inviting us to be a part of this panel. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Commission of Jurists. We are a human rights and rule of law organization. We have our office here in Bangkok, but we're headquartered in Geneva. So I would like to discuss today the human rights and rule of law situation in Cambodia in relation to the elections. For us, the results of the elections were entirely predictable. We knew what was going to happen. I think the fact that on Sunday evening, it was reported that the CPP spokesperson had claimed that the party has won in a landslide, even before the final vote tally was made official. I think that's incredibly telling. For us, I think it would be very strange to imagine a situation where one does not win a landslide after having snuffed out all credible opposition through brute force and violence. So whether this general election was free and fair has to be seen within the human rights and rule of law crisis in Cambodia. This crisis is being further entrenched by the intensified assaults on the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, association, and political participation. And just earlier today, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights just issued a statement expressing his regret that the elections were held in very restrictive environment. So in the lead up to the elections, we documented that there were mass convictions of opposition party leaders and members on spurious charges, the weaponization of laws that do not comply with international human rights law and standards against human rights defenders and the media, and also acts of violence and incitement of violence against perceived political opponents that were carried out with impunity. We are deeply concerned about this human rights situation, about the abysmal human rights situation and the democratic deficit in Cambodia. This systematic disregard for Cambodia's international human rights obligations has also been exacerbated by the lack of independence, impartiality, and accountability of key actors and institutions, including the National Election Committee and justice sector actors, including the judiciary. So I will illustrate these concerns in terms of the civic space in Cambodia using three emblematic examples that occurred in the lead up to the elections. So the first would be the revocation of VOD's license, Voice of Democracy, which further contributed to the decline of freedom of expression and freedom of the press in the country. So VOD's license, VOD is an independent media outlet in Cambodia. Their license was revoked in February this year in a process that we considered as arbitrary, which dealt another blow to the diminished space for free media in Cambodia. Without saying, an independent press is crucial for free and fair elections, and its closure had an immediate impact on national elections. We weren't very clear about the specific basis, the specific law that was used as the basis to shut down VOD. But from our research and from our interactions with Cambodian lawyers, we believe it to be the sub-decree on organizing and function of the Ministry of Information. And just a week before the elections, it was also reported that online access to several media outlets were cut. This included Radio Free Asia, Cambodia Daily, and Kamnotra. What is clear for us is that the revocation and blocking process lacked transparency with no clear avenue for appeal. The Information Ministry in this case has sole authority to allocate and revoke media licenses and block access to the websites of media outlets. And as the ICJ has repeatedly emphasized, these extrajudicial practices are incompatible with international law and standards and the rule of law. The crackdown on human rights defenders and political opposition also persisted in the lead up to the elections, which seriously undermined the civic and political space necessary for free and fair elections. These were carried out through laws that do not comply with Cambodia's human rights obligations because they are vague, they are overbroad, and they provide authorities with virtually unlimited latitude for discretionary enforcement. They also impose harsh criminal sanctions, which are inconsistent with the principles of necessity and proportionality under human rights law. So some examples of problematic laws within the criminal code include Article 425, which criminalizes the communication or disclosure of false information, Article 437 bis, the lèse majesté provision, Article 453, which criminalizes plotting, and the very often used Articles 494 and 495, which criminalize incitement to commit a felony or disturb social security. So the second incident which I want to highlight is the verdict against opposition leader Kem Sokha. And I think a lot of people have talked about it already, but for us, it highlights the politicization and lack of independence within Cambodia's judicial system. Just a month after the revocation of VOD's license, Kem Sokha, the leader of the arbitrarily dissolved opposition CNRP, was convicted under Article 443 on conspiracy with a foreign power. We are concerned about numerous violations of the right to a fair trial in the proceedings, including the unsound evidentiary basis for Kem Sokha's conviction. And for us, what this demonstrates is that the judicial system in Cambodia has been politicized and it lacks independence. And this is a persistent problem in Cambodia. There are instances where certain judges openly align themselves with the ruling party, which results in a serious compromise of their independence. And this is deeply concerning for us because it allows the courts to be utilized as tools against perceived opponents of the ruling party. And these concerns are also compounded by reports that indicate that there is a lack of adherence to basic fair trial standards. For instance, there is a high reliance on confessions in courts, often obtained through the use of physical and psychological pressure by the police. Additionally, there also appears to be a presumption of guilt in cases involving political opponents and human rights defenders, which further undermines the principles of fair trial. So the third incident that I want to talk about is the rejection of the registration of political parties by the NEC that I think my other panelists have already spoken about, and the undermining of political participation in Cambodia. So as we know, in May 2023, the NEC rejected the registration of the Candlelight Party and the Khmer United Great Nation Party for the national election in a process that we considered as being arbitrary and discriminatory. And so what it appears to us is that the ruling party is utilizing all the repressive measures they could to eliminate political opposition, which restricts political participation in the country. Voters themselves are also being targeted. Following calls from exiled CNRP leaders to spoil their ballots as a form of protest, the Cambodian authorities have then arrested several opposition members and released the names and photos of 40 so-called rebels for inciting others to spoil their ballots. All of this has been occurring against the backdrop of violence and threats of violence against opposition members by soon-to-be ex-Prime Minister Hun Sen himself. For example, I think some of you may be aware, but back in January, he live-streamed a speech on his Facebook page saying that he will gather CPP people to protest and beat you up and send people to your place and home. He also live-streamed other speeches threatening to shoot Sam Rainsy with a rocket launcher, and that opponents should prepare their coffins if he lost the elections. So as some of you might be aware, this resulted in the Oversight Board of Meta issuing a decision to Meta to suspend Hun Sen from Facebook and Instagram for 6 months in relation to the 6th January video. In that case, the ICJ was heavily involved in the decision. We submitted a public comment in that case that was cited several times in the decision, pointing to the poor human rights record in the country and highlighting how political leaders should not enjoy higher protections for incitement to violence and violent speech by virtue of their status alone. And a day before the Oversight Board decision, Hun Sen announced that he was going to be moving to Telegram. But what we heard is that recently, on 20th July, he's back. He has reactivated his account, and it remains to be seen whether or not Meta will enforce the Oversight Board's decision to suspend Hun Sen's account. And these threats, this incitement to violence had real-life consequences. Human Rights Watch documented that after those speeches were made, they were followed by a series of acts of violence targeting opposition party members. So what I've shared in terms of the 3 incidents just represents a fraction of the assaults on civic space in Cambodia from all fronts, as Prime Minister Hun Sen tries to set the stage for a handover to his son after nearly 4 decades of iron-fisted rule. We at the ICJ stand in solidarity with the people of Cambodia who have had to endure yet another farce of an election where their right to political participation and freedom of expression have been seriously undermined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daron. I think it's a familiar picture we all know. I hope that Sam Rainsy is going to stay away from any rocket launchers wherever he is. Sam Rainsy